Good Monday morning. Happy Halloween 2022. We've got a feeling this morning we haven't had really since last year with the Jets and Giants, where there's two very, very disappointing losses. These teams were riding high. They were beating teams we didn't expect them to beat. And then yesterday, when you thought, okay, these are difficult spots for both of these teams, but they could still win. Well, neither one of them happened, and the most disappointing being the Jets hosting the Patriots and the way that game went. Jets playing well, crowds into it. You get this pick six to make it potentially 17-3. John Franklin Myers roughing the passer. It gets called back, and then nothing was the same after that. Bill Belichick just picked apart the Jets the rest of the game, and Zach Wilson looked like he never played football before in his life until he stepped on the field yesterday. That's got to change if this kid's got any shot. Giants went out to Seattle. I don't think you beat them up too much today. Richie James with a couple of bad fumbles, but that's a tough spot for them. I think that still, with the games ahead of them, they can really head into Dallas with some momentum on Thanksgiving. We've got a fun one for you today on this Halloween 2022. Good morning, Boomer. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, G. And I know that Jet and Giant fans are very disappointed this morning as we get back to reality here in Football Central for New York. But I think you captured it. I mean, Richie James could be the culprit for the loss out in Seattle. That was going to be a tough game. Geno Smith played okay. Their defense out there gave Daniel Jones and his offense all they could handle. Was inclement weather, all of that. I can understand that, and it's a disappointing loss. But, now the Giants got to get back here. They got to get their act together, and they got to respond to that. But, however, for the Jets, I read everything last night. I heard Zach Wilson after the game, which we'll get into as the morning goes on here, because I think this kid is living in the clouds, to be honest with you.
What do you mean by that, living in the clouds?
I just think, we're going to see the Patriots in 2 weeks. We'll be ready to go again, and, all these different things. I mean, there's a learning process that all these kids go through, and some take a little bit longer than others. Josh Allen was booed in his second year. Tua Tagovailoa was booed in his second year. A lot of these, Daniel Jones was almost run out of town after 3 years. And really, it comes down to the individual person himself and whether or not, he can withstand the anxiety and the intensity of the game on the field and make rational decisions that don't cost his team. And it's a fine line that the coaches are dealing with over there at the Jets, because they do have a highly talented player, and you can see it, but they also have a player that is playing with a reckless disregard for his actions, and it's costing his team. And the team knows this. The team understands why they're losing. The team can see these interceptions that are happening. I'll give him the first one, off the back foot, bad throw, high. It's under pressure. I'll give you that one. I'll give everybody a pass for at least once or twice a game, depending on what the situation is. The other two are just completely careless, no matter what Zach Wilson says after the game. They're careless. This is professional football. This is not BYU. You're not playing against, the WAC conference. You are playing against other men, and you're playing with men whose lives depend and their paychecks depend on you going out and winning football games. That's why you at that position have a chance to be the highest paid player on your team if you're good at it and you can carry your team. And for him to play with such not a lack of understanding of what the hell is going on is really, it's eye-opening for me. I didn't think they were going to win yesterday because of him, because I didn't think he's ready yet. I still don't think he's ready yet. And I don't know what they're doing, in terms of with the Flacco and the Mike Whites, and the bringing up the Strevler and all this other stuff, trying to make, I don't know, confuse the Patriots or whatever. But the one that's confused is Zach Wilson, their own quarterback, and somebody has got to get into his ear, and somebody's got to get into his face.
Well, one of the takes that I had going into this game why I thought Zach was going to play better is how out of control he played the week prior, and the fact that they still won, and you were like, all right, we'll go into this game. I think Zach's going to get that stuff corrected. The coaching staff's going to make sure he doesn't do it again, because you can't play like a circus act and expect to win in the NFL every week. And then it gets worse the next week. So what is it? Is it Mike LaFleur? Is it your buddy Rob Calabrese that are telling these things to Zach Wilson and he's not paying attention to them? Or are they not making that as much of a point of emphasis as it should be? Because for him to come out of the game that he had in Denver when he was running around like a maniac and then be worse the next week is really, really alarming.
Well, I give you 3 examples: Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Carson Wentz. And I said this yesterday on TV. I said, those guys are moving around all over the place and playing with their hair on fire and relying on their athleticism to go out there and get the job done. And while that athleticism and the ability to extend plays is really important for a lot of quarterbacks, almost all quarterbacks in the league, maybe with the exception of maybe 3 or 4, the fact remains that the best place for you to be able to deliver the football is in the pocket. That's how the offenses are drawn up. And maybe there's 5 or 6 plays that you make that extends a play to get your team a first down, to get your team a touchdown, and that's great. But you can't always play like your hair is on fire. You just can't. You can't do it. It's impossible. And so what he has to do, and I think what the coaching staff, I'm sure, is doing, is they got to make sure that he knows what his responsibilities are, where he's looking, how to read defenses, and not make these colossal bonehead errors. I mean, and I almost got to the point yesterday where I felt like if it were me, I would just sit him down and say enough's enough.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
because you got to hold him accountable.
Well, after that third, that's what I was thinking about, the difference between what we saw with Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones after that pick in Week 1 in Tennessee, and then Zach Wilson playing the way he did in Denver, coming back and then throwing those 3 interceptions. After that third one, I thought that might have been on the table, the benching of him.
It would have been on the table for me.
So that is an issue right there. For sure, being held accountable. He was babied in his rookie season. We talked about that the entire year, bringing in his quarterback coach and all the babying that was going on with Zach Wilson. We hated it. So now is the time. If they didn't do it after last week because they were basking in the glow of how great the 5-2 start was for them, then they got to do it this week. I mean, this is now the time. It's like, as you said, there's guys that are counting on him. You got Elijah Moore again after the game. He's chirping a little bit. He's being negative. Zach Wilson is acting like a jerk in the postgame, not answering any questions like he's won 6 Super Bowls. Somehow he has this attitude after a game like that. He needs a reality check.
Well, welcome to New York, Zach. You came from your bubble in Utah, and now you're here, and you are, for all the glory to see, the Jet fan shows up. Your coach is imploring the fans to show up. Your team is imploring the fans to show up. They show up, and you put that performance out there. And that performance, I have to say, the second 2 interceptions they're unexplainable to me. He cannot. To me, that's nerves. To me, that's just carelessness. To me, that is all the things that young quarterbacks go through. And then hopefully on the other side, when they do finally ultimately emerge from that, the playing that way, that they'll end up being better. But I have to say, Greg, that if I were Saleh on the sideline, again, like Saleh's a defensive guy. I'm a former player who played the position, and I kind of feel like when you see a guy play like that, you just want to yank him off the field, and you want to say, no more. You're not getting on the field until you learn that you can't do this to the team. If it's a tipped interception, or if it's a 50-50 ball and they come down with it, I can live with those things because you're being aggressive and you're giving your players an opportunity to go make plays. But the indiscriminate throwing of the ball, like flipping it down the sideline and Devin McCourty coming down with it like it's a punt.
Well, that I could not understand.
It is like that to me right then and there. It should have been his last play.
Right.
And now I know they're probably thinking, and again, I'm not in their meeting rooms and I don't have any sort of inside information. I'm just trying to go by what I've seen over the years, not only playing but covering this thing. They're thinking, okay, we'll get him out there, and in garbage. Well, it's not really garbage time because the game was still very close and it was still competitive. Let's see if we can get something going offensively. He did throw for over 340 yards, and there were a lot of pass completions. But it just felt like that the game was lost on that last interception. It was like they had no chance.
Well, if you look back at it, it felt like the game was lost with the John Franklin Myers roughing the passer call. Now, I understand we hate these calls. Something like that happened 4 or 5 years ago. It would have never been called, but the game has changed.
All right, but we're talking about 2 different things here right now, okay? So we're talking about Zach Wilson and his problems.
Right, of course.
Which are enormous.
Absolutely.
And I would tell you 2 penalties that were called yesterday, one on Franklin Myers and one on C.J. Mosley, shouldn't have been called.
Oh, the C.J. Mosley one especially.
And why is Mac Jones staying on the field after that?
Right, after he laid down there for a while and didn't seem like
we
he
were
get
all about
faculties
concussions
back
now and taking care of
right.
people.
So, but the John Franklin Myers one, first of all, he has a history of this. This has been going on. There was another penalty earlier in the year with the roughing the passer. You can't do it. Now, some of the stuff that we saw with the Tom Brady one, that was just absolutely awful. There was another one prior to that, I forget now, that was even worse. This one, to me, was going to get called. Like, if that were, I'm watching this game and I see this, a flag's going to happen there.
I know that.
So,
there's
so
no
Rob
such...
Saleh's screaming and yelling at the officials. How about screaming and yelling at John Franklin Myers? And then after your quarterback throws that third interception, how about screaming and yelling at him?
Well, I will say this, that there's no such thing as launching in the NFL. You have to hit around the head and neck area. That's basically like, or unless you throw your crown of your helmet into the chest of the quarterback, that will be like a spearing penalty. That wasn't the case, but you're right. Anything that is even remotely close to that in real time, the referee is going to throw the flag on that, whether it is a real roughing the passer or not. What he is seeing in real time, he believes is a hit that should not be thrown at the quarterback. So that's why he's throwing the flag. After the replays and everything else, and you look at it, you see that he didn't hit him in the head or in the neck area. And by the way, I talked to Gene Steratore after the game yesterday about those two particular penalties. He said, he goes, after I look at it, it's not roughing the passer, but I will say in real time, it's going to be roughing the passer every time.
Well, especially after what happened earlier this year with Tua, and there's more focus on the concussions, even though Mac Jones ended up staying in the game. But, I mean, it's just like you have to know, and I know how hard it is to be a defensive lineman and then to hold up in those situations, but I've seen other guys do it. I have. There's been other guys who have made that adjustment. And this was not the first time that John Franklin Myers has found himself in this situation. So, yeah, I mean, it stinks that the game is the way it is right now when it comes to those calls, but you got to adjust at some point. You absolutely have to. So I don't know if 17-3, the entire game changes, and the Patriots don't have the second half they have, and the Jets run the ball, and Zach Wilson doesn't have to do as much, and he doesn't throw those interceptions. I don't know how it was going to go. But 17-3 against the Patriots at home in the atmosphere that was going on there, I have to think that the outcome would have been differently. I have to think that.
Yeah, well, you have to, and I have to go back and look at this tape because, there are times where I feel like, and again, this is a young player that is not comfortable with everything that he's seeing right now. It's one of the reasons why he's playing the way he's playing, and that is like a predetermined, I'm scrambling no matter what. I'm dropping back and I'm taking off no matter what because I can't see or I don't know what I'm doing. And if you don't know what you're doing and you can't see, then you can't play. Because, Rob Saleh owes it to every other person in that locker room. That team played its ass off yesterday. That defense played tough. They held them to 22 points. They were all over Mac Jones. They had, six sacks I think they had. They had the rough in the passer, unfortunately. That was going to be a touchdown return. I mean, you cannot allow your quarterback, just because he's the second overall pick, to impact the game so negatively when everybody else in that room is fighting their ass off to win a game.
Yeah, and I guess it was the fourth quarter. It was the first time they actually got Zach Wilson to the ground, and the broadcast is talking about like, wow, that was actually the first sack that the Jets have given up today. And I'm thinking, I actually would have preferred that there were more sacks in this game. Because what happens is Zach spins himself out of it, then he's looking down the field, and he's throwing a ball up with his eyes closed. There's times I want him to take a sack as opposed to turning the ball over and doing the stuff that we saw. So I don't even think that was much of an achievement that there was only one sack in the game of Zach Wilson.
I almost feel like I'm watching like the reincarnation of the professional Baker Mayfield. This is the professional Baker Mayfield. That's all over the place. Mm-hmm. That's firing the ball 100 miles an hour. That's indiscriminately throwing it into coverages when he shouldn't be. And look what happened to Baker Mayfield. I mean, the team just said enough, and plus his personality grew too big, I think, in Cleveland for anybody to handle it and anybody get into his face. Like Brian Dable should have been Baker Mayfield's coach.
Sure, yeah.
Be screaming at him.
Right.
And I'm sure he would be doing the same thing at Zach Wilson. Now, the biggest difference between the quarterbacks here, obviously, are the amount of years that they have played. So Dable inherits a kid who's already got the slings and arrows that have been thrown at him as a quarterback in Daniel Jones. So he's already come through that, and now he feels like it's his responsibility, Brian Dable's responsibility, to get the most out of that player and to find out whether or not he can be the leader of the Giants moving forward. And so far, so good. And Daniel Jones is not turning the ball over anymore. He's not making those stupid mistakes, standing in there and fumbling the ball and throwing indiscriminate interceptions. So he's kind of broken him down a little bit from that standpoint, and it's in his fourth year. Zach is in his second year. He's had injuries. He's had issues. He's been, babied his entire life, I feel like. I feel like he's like an entitled little brat when he's standing up there and he's talking to us after the game.
It sounded like yesterday. Yep.
You know what? That pissed me off. That pissed me. I'm not even a Jet fan. But that, as a guy that's played that position, to act like that after the game, I'd want to go up and punch him right in the face if I were his teammate.
Yeah, well, he needs a reality check from somebody in that locker room or that coaching staff.
It's almost like, are you realizing what's happening around you, and stop with with what you're trying to explain is supposed to be your accountability to this game. I think he tried to do that, and then it got worse.
All right, Boomer and Gio on the Fan and CBS Sports Network for that post-game press conference. If you missed it, Jerry Recco will play some of that Zach Wilson sound coming up in just a couple of minutes as we just get started on this Football Monday.